Mabuhay, I am Maita Pastolero.
Mabuhay! I am Giselle Christy Contapay.
Mabuhay, I am Bridget Belasis.
Mabuhay! I am Dakodas Fragancio.
Mabuhay, I am Shira May M. Talapas.
Buckle your seatbelts because our group will be presenting about the conservation of Fort Santiago. Statement of Significance. Intramuros, also known as the Walled City, is one of Manila's oldest communities. It was constructed in 1571 on the south bank of the Pasig River. Intramuros was the center of the Spanish occupation for over 400 years. Numerous tourist attractions are situated inside Intramuros, and one of those is Fort Santiago. Fort Santiago has been the scene of many historical events in the country since it is the oldest Spanish fortress in the Philippines. The precise site where Fort Santiago is presently located was formerly a Muslim kingdom governed by Raja Sulaiman, the kingdom's chieftain, and in 1571, the arrival of Spaniards in the Philippines demolished the site and constructed the fortress as its replacement, with the site bearing the name of St. James, which means Santiago in Spanish. In 1762 to 1764, the British used Fort Santiago as their capital. In 1778, the Americans repaired the fort, which served the command center for the Philippines Division of the U.S. Army. And when the Japanese invaded the Philippines in 1942 during World War II, the site was once again used as a military base. However, this time, the fortress was also used by the Japanese as a prison for their Filipino and American captives, where an estimate of 2,500 to 3,000 Filipinos and Americans were said to have been imprisoned and tortured inside Fort Santiago, while more than 600 people died as discovered by the U.S. Army during the liberation of Manila in 1945. And notably, in 1896, Jose Rizal was also imprisoned in Fort Santiago before his execution. With these historical events, we can say that Fort Santiago is really significant to the point that it must be conserved. Reason for conserving. Fort Santiago is being conserved mainly for its historical significance in the Philippines. This heritage site serves as a reminder for the challenges that the nation has faced during the years when it was still colonized, and has been the symbol of the influences that foreign countries have left upon invading our land. Other than its historical mark on the country, Fort Santiago is also being conserved because of the fragility of its current state. Having been built over 400 years ago, the fortress is not as strong as it was before. It is vulnerable to certain environmental factors and negative tourist bearings. Actual state before conservation. In 1945, the U.S. Liberation Forces came and combated Japanese in Fort Santiago to aid in the liberation of the Philippines during World War II. Consequently, they defeated the Japanese, and Fort Santiago was heavily damaged because of the American artillery bombardment and military mortar shells of Filipinos. Let us now proceed to the issues faced during conservation. May I call on Ms. Contapay?
Of course, the first issue encountered during the conservation of Fort Santiago is the natural hazards. It is because the age structure of Fort Santiago is critical, especially since it was built in early 1590s. Some parts of the fortress may be fragile. Natural hazards such as earthquakes, floods, or any other phenomenon may prevent the conservation of the whole establishment. Second issue is the squatters. Before visiting Fort Santiago, you have to roam inside Intramuros. The majority of the squatter settlements are visible from a distance in the walled city center. The architectural style within Intramuros is well known for having a Spanish influence. However, these squatter settlements do not have those influential characteristics. These houses can be seen on the way to the entrance of the Fort Santiago and can negatively influence its image for its conservation. The third issue is the preservation of heritage collections. There are collections inside Fort Santiago such as the colonial bombs in the canyons. When the pandemic lockdown happened in the Philippines, staff were limited in Fort Santiago and no one could monitor the collections to ensure the conservation of these materials. The fourth and last issue is the maintaining of healthy and safe workplace. As mentioned, the lockdown happened. Staff were limited and tourism stopped to ensure everyone's safety from COVID-19. Therefore, only a small number of people can monitor the well-being of Fort Santiago. And that's it for the issues faced during conservation. Now let us proceed to conservation method used, and may I call on Miss Bailasis.
Now let's proceed to the conservation method in Fort Santiago. There is a law for the conservation method of Fort Santiago, known as the Republic Act No. 597, an act to declare Fort Santiago a national shrine and to provide for the preservation of historical monument in the walled city of Manila. As we all know, Fort Santiago was heavily damaged during the World War II battle in Manila in 1945. Section 1 of this law states that Fort Santiago shall be reconstructed as closely as possible along the lines of its original structure. Therefore, its original material of volcanic tuff or adobe must be used. It was declared as a shrine of freedom in 1950, and it was not until 1953 that the National Parks Development Commission started restoring it on behalf of the Philippine government. Since 1992, the fort has been built, maintained, and managed by the Intramuros administration. Additionally, as part of its conservation method, no building may be built or renovated in Fort Santiago without first receiving the consent of the organizations in charge. And that's it for the conservation method. Let us now proceed to the benefits from conservation. May I call on Ms. Blagancia and Ms. Talapas.
Conservation of heritage building is a vital component of urban revitalization efforts. Some of the most significant benefits from conservation of Fort Santiago are: first, local businesses of the community are strengthened. Businesses benefit from locating in heritage buildings and areas. When you go to Fort Santiago, you will notice that there are a lot of vendors, convenience stores, food establishment, and other businesses. In conserving Fort Santiago, tourists will continue to visit the site and local communities will also benefit from it by generating revenues. Second is increased tourism because Fort Santiago is well known for being linked to our history. The tourists keep coming back to the site to witness the prisons and dungeons. The conservation of the site increases the tourism of the city and the country.
Third, conservation is energy savings. Heritage building conservation is proven energy saver. The energy required to erect a new building is roughly equivalent to the energy required to operate it for 40 years. Conserving Fort Santiago is much better than creating a new building because it takes a shorter amount of time than creating a new building. Fourth and lastly, conservation of heritage sites connects us to the past. Conservation of Fort Santiago allows the current and future generation to witness the physical structure. In doing so, it connects them to the past and history of the Philippines. Through conservation, we might be gone in this world, but the legacy of the heritage will continue. And that's it for our reporting about the conservation of Fort Santiago. Thank you and mabuhay.